Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to help support the show by becoming a premium member, please go to dogmanencounters.com/podcast to sign up. Memberships are only $2.99 a month. By becoming a premium member, you'll be able to download episodes onto your mobile device and listen to them commercial-free wherever you go. Also, if you'd like to check out the new Dogman Encounters t-shirt store, please go to dogmanencounters.com/store and take a look around. Buying a t-shirt or sweatshirt there is another great way to help support the show. As always, thanks for listening. Alright, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest is David. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Vic.
Oh, you're welcome. Dave, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I'm a 35-year-old father of two, married, and I've spent most of my life working with animals. My younger years I spent working with wildlife as a wildlife rehabber. Even before that, I was part of a very special anatomy class in my high school. We were actually able to dissect certain exotic animals that had passed away at the zoo, namely an African lion, hippopotamus, and even a harp seal. But I spent most of my life outdoors, hiking, fishing, watching the wildlife. It's kind of always been a passion of mine.
I'm jealous. I wish I could have done all the things that you did. I've always been fascinated with animals. Please tell us about your life before your encounter versus after your encounter.
Well, like I said, I spent a lot of time outside. I knew what was real and what wasn't, and I had a lot fewer reservations about what could be hiding behind the next rock. It was always going to be, a deer or a bear or something like that. Since then, I'm just not too sure what's out there.
Yeah, when you realize the dogmen are out there, it does have a way of turning your life upside down. Because as you know now, for years when you're told that life is a certain way, then suddenly you find out that it's not, that is really hard to handle. For years, your family members have been trying to get you to share your encounter with me. Why'd you wait so long to do it?
I think fear, mostly, and possibly, not possibly, a certain reservation about reliving that event, about knowing for certain that it did happen. I'm not crazy, and I did see what I saw.
When you say that, does that mean they believed you when you told them about what happened that night?
My wife did, I think. Well, I know my wife believed me, but she hasn't seen something like that, so she has no frame of reference. She knows me to be an honest person, and her exact words were, "I know you, why would you lie about something like that?"
Well, I'm glad at least she's open-minded and understanding. That's a start. Speaking of your family, your daughter's had a long-standing fear of monsters called scrunts. Please tell us what scrunts are and how they tie into your experience.
Well, a scrunt is a creature from kind of a fantasy movie by M. Night Shyamalan called The Lady in the Water. And the scrunt is described as being a canine-like animal with fur down its back that's long and green like grass, and they can lay totally flat, so they appear like a bump in the lawn, is how it's described in the movie. And when she must have been 5 years old, she was shown that movie by a family member, and, she'd been terrified of them ever since. Any sort of dog-shaped thing, or even the dogs barking at night would frighten her. She's 14 now, and she's still scared of these things. And when she was really little, after waking up from a nightmare about a scrunt going to get her, she'd ask me questions like, "Daddy, things like that aren't real, right?" No, honey, things like in the movie aren't real. "But monsters aren't real, right, Daddy?" Not as far as you know, honey. It creates a situation where you end up having to lie to your children. What are you going to tell a 5-year-old? "Yeah, monsters are real, honey. Daddy saw one." That's probably not the best parenting decision to make.
Well, that's definitely a difficult situation to handle, but you handled it the best way you knew how, so don't be too hard on yourself. Before you tell us about your encounter, please tell us about the place where you had it.
Well, the location is a kind of a desolate mountain road in the California foothills. It's in eastern Fresno County, just on the border to Tulare County. And if you're familiar with that area, you know there's oak trees and dry grass as far as the eye can see. At night in the mountains, it's almost a totally different world. There's no street lights. There's no reflectors in the road. It's kind of an eerie place to be to begin with, but I drove that road every day for years to and from work.
I can only imagine how difficult it must have been to have an experience like that at a place where you've got to drive past it every night on the way to work after you have that experience. That's not easy. All right, Dave, please tell us about your encounter. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Well, it was late evening, probably about 10 o'clock or so, and I had gotten off work a couple hours earlier and stopped by a friend's house to just chew the fat. And as I was driving home, this is a real windy mountain road. I just got out of a kind of a sweeping left-hand turn onto a nice long straightaway, probably about a mile long. And as I got out of the turn, I noticed there was something in the road up ahead of me. And, you know, being a windy mountain road, I never drove particularly fast. And occasionally there'd be animals in the road. There'd be, you know, a deer or a coyote or raccoons or foxes or what have you. And hitting a deer on that road is not a good time because you're going to be sitting there for quite a while before anybody comes to collect you. So taking this turn pretty slowly, I notice what's up ahead of me and I immediately get off the gas. I start slowing down and I'm thinking to myself, oh, somebody hit a deer. And it's, whatever this thing is, it's laying just to the left of the center line. And it looked like it was facing in the direction I was traveling, you know, deer laying down on the road. And as I got a little closer, I realized that no, that fur's too long. That's not a deer. It must be a coyote. And you know, having worked wildlife rehab for years, I was fully prepared to throw a deer in the backseat of my car and drop it off on my way. The rehab center that I worked at was just a couple miles up the road. I was literally going to be driving right past it. It wouldn't have been the first time I dropped an animal off in the middle of the night and went on my way. But I figured since it's a coyote, this is going to be a little bit more difficult of a procedure. And when I was within, 30, 50 feet, if that, this animal turned its head towards my car. And I noticed the kind of yellowish green sheen of its eyes, and it was definitely a canid of some sort. And then it stood up. And it stood up on two legs. And I had no way to process what I was looking at. I actually slowed my car to a stop. When I rolled to a stop, its front legs were actually blocked by the front fender of my car. And I'm looking at this thing that is way too tall. I'm a fairly tall, slender guy. I'm 6'2", and this thing is got to be pushing 7 feet. But its limbs are so spindly. If you took a 200-pound German Shepherd and you stretched it out to 7 feet tall, you get an idea of the proportions of this thing. It was just beyond anything I had ever experienced. And my first thought was somebody was playing a prank on me. Somebody's having a laugh tonight. And I kept looking at its arms, and I'm looking at its torso, and I'm looking at its face. And this isn't a man in a suit. Nobody is that skinny. Nobody is that thin. And I'm watching this thing breathe, and I'm watching ribs, the bottom of its rib cage every time it takes a breath. And I stood there. I mean, it was right outside my driver's side window, less than 3 feet. If I had opened my door to get out, it would have had to have backed up. And not having any experience with this, I looked at it, and it's not hostile. That's the other thing. It wasn't hostile at all. It almost seemed curious, staring at me through the window of my car. And I'm just taking this thing all in. You know, it's paws, hands, whatever you want to call them. They're not like a human hand. They're like a raccoon's paw. No opposable thumb, but long, slender digits, long wrists, long forearms. And the only thing I could think was, well, and I put my foot on the accelerator and I slowly started rolling away. And I'm driving a 1986 Dodge Aries. And if you have any idea what kind of car that is, it's not exactly built for speed. And even if it had been, I wasn't in a big hurry to get away. I was just stuck. I was dumbfounded, trying to process what I was seeing. And I'm watching this thing in my rear view and my side view, and it's slowly disappearing in my tail light. And I drive up this straightaway, start getting into some more curves, and I realize, about a mile down the road, I'm driving incredibly fast. I'm driving stupidly fast, not only for this car, but for the road that I'm on. And the more and more I think about what I've just seen, the more and more I keep coming back to, I just saw a werewolf. But werewolves aren't real. Werewolves don't exist. What just happened? What just happened? And by the time I passed the wildlife facility that I worked at, I must have been doing 65 miles an hour on a road that, you know, you shouldn't even be doing 40 on. I blew through a stop sign that was just up the road from me. Didn't even think about the fact that the sheriffs like to sit right there and catch drunk drivers running the stop sign. Didn't care. And I'm taking turns at just a ridiculous speed. I go racing up my driveway, I put my car in park, and I just sit there for the next 10 minutes, trying to figure out what the hell I just saw, and how am I going to explain that to anybody? And how is it that the world is no longer what I thought it was? Well, I walked in my front door, and I must have looked like I had just seen something, because the first words out of my parents' mouths were, "Are you okay? What happened?" And I must have, like I said, I must have looked like a crazy person, and I think they were half expecting me to say, "I just saw a car accident," or "I just hit somebody with my car," or "There was a parade of pink elephants marching down the middle of the road." I feel like they would have had a better reaction to any one of those things than what I described to them. I described to them what I saw. I tried to have every detail laid out there for them, and I'm pacing back and forth in front of the front door. I didn't even make it out of the foyer, and they're just looking at me with this confused expression on their face. And I couldn't, for some reason, I kept looking to make sure the back door was closed, like maybe this thing, or I kept looking over my shoulder to make sure the front door was closed, like this thing had followed me, or maybe that's what they were giving this confused expression to, you know, standing over my shoulder. No, he's right. So I walked into the kitchen because I needed a drink of water. My mouth was dry, and they obviously weren't getting what I was describing to them. How could they? And I could hear from the living room my mom say, "What do you think he saw?" And my dad, I could hear the shrug in his voice. "I don't know, but he saw something. That's not like him." And went to bed that night and really didn't sleep because The world I knew had been turned upside down. Monsters don't exist. Werewolves don't exist. These things aren't real. But apparently they are. Because I had just seen something that I had zero experience with. I spent my whole life working with animals. I knew every kind of animal within 100 miles of where I lived and worked. And this thing didn't look like any one of them. It had fur like a coyote and a head kind of the same shape, but that was about it.
Do you think seeing that Dogman gave you more trouble, or coming to the realization that you'd been living a lie believing that monsters didn't exist did?
I'd have to say it's a tie. I'd have to say those things go hand in hand. You see something that you know doesn't exist. You knew before that day that it does not exist. And then it's standing, looking through your driver's side window. And it's real. And it's flesh and blood. And it's close enough to touch you.
Yeah, either one would be really hard to deal with, so I understand. Since you got such a good look at it, as accurately as you can, please describe the creature you saw that night for us.
Its fur was lightish brown, almost the same shade as a coyote. Much thicker along the back. That was where I first saw it. Imagine a dog laying down, curled up with its head up, facing away from you. Along down its shoulders and spine, fur was much thicker. Standing up, it was more sparse on the abdomen. The limbs were just freakishly thin and long, longer than my arms. It had the kind of stereotypical werewolf legs with the reversed haunch, that backward bending almost knee. The chest was deep, protruding almost like a German Shepherd, but more rounded on the sides. Its shoulders weren't flat like a dog's would have been. They were protruding somewhat. The fingers were much longer than mine, but no opposable thumb. And its nails, it didn't have a sharp werewolf nail. It had kind of blunt, too thick to be human. And its eyes, that was the thing that kind of struck me the most. They almost seemed to be glowing even when the headlights weren't shining directly in them. They were an amber, almost green color. And you could read intelligence in it. This was a thinking creature, not just some dumb animal, afraid of headlights. This was calculating. The shape of the head was obviously painted, very long snout, wider than you'd expect on a dog. The ears weren't particularly pointed. They were standing straight up. I do remember that. They were pointed right at me. They weren't down or back like an aggressive dog or coyote or wolf. And it did have a tail, short, not long and bushy like you'd expect.
When you were slowly rolling past it, did it have its mouth open or closed?
Its mouth was closed. It wasn't baring teeth or anything, and I could, with some animals you can see just a hint of the tips of the canine teeth poking out under the lips, and I remember that. The thing didn't growl or bare its teeth, but if I had to tell you what kind of facial expression it was making, it was almost smirking. It was kind of a curious, surprised look, but plastered on a dog's face. A very, very human expression on a dog's face.
That must have been quite the sight to see. When we talked about the details of your encounter for the first time, you realized something that you say really pissed you off. Please tell us more about that.
Well, I realized in replaying this whole thing, this thing was waiting in the road for someone. It was waiting for someone to happen by.
Why do you think it was doing that?
The only thing that comes to mind is it was waiting there to terrify whoever came around that corner or came down that road. Anybody who lived up there would have slowed down for any animal in the road like that. And anybody could have happened on that thing. And it happened to be me. But the fact that it was calculating enough to just wait right there in the road for somebody to drive on past it, the more I thought about that, the more it really pissed me off.
Unfortunately, lucky you had to be the one who came by.
Well, yeah. I guess I feel like I'm glad it was me and not somebody who could have crashed their car, gotten hurt, been stranded out there with that thing.
Well, that's an altruistic way to look at it. That's impressive. Did you ever go back there at any other time?
Well, other than driving back and forth through there just about every day afterwards, I did take a friend of mine that I told about my encounter. For a while, I think he was about the only person who really believed me. He wanted to go down there and investigate the area, and I really just was not comfortable with that idea. At the time, I owned a .22 target pistol, and he owned a little .38 special. I didn't feel like that was the kind of firepower you take to go look for something like that. And he bugged me enough about it that I eventually took him down there, but I wouldn't go after dark, and I wouldn't go close to dark. We actually went late evening while the sun was still up, and I showed him exactly in the road where it was sitting, pointed out which way it was facing. He asked me at the time which direction I thought it took off in, and I couldn't answer that question because it just kind of disappeared into the darkness as my taillights moved away from it.
I realized you had to go past there every night to get to work and to go home from work, but did you ever get out of the car and look around?
Not really. I just wasn't comfortable with the idea. I wanted to. I just wasn't comfortable with the idea of putting myself in that vulnerable position. What if it had come back? Like I said, it's a long time before somebody else happens by in that area. And I just didn't want to be alone out there.
Well, I don't blame you, and I'm glad you didn't do that. You feel guilty for not having as violent of an encounter as some of the eyewitnesses you've heard on the show. Why do you feel that way?
You hear a lot of these encounters that people relate, and they're damaged. They're broken by what happened. They're victimized by these things. They're tormented, some people for miles. And I didn't have that. I would feel guilty when I finally started looking into this and finding out what it was I actually saw. Because I felt like my world had been turned upside down. But some of these other people had been truly, truly tormented. I don't want to say it's survivor's guilt or anything like that, but this is the closest thing I can compare it to. I felt bad for feeling bad when, like I said, some people had just been truly victimized.
That makes sense, and I understand. The first time we spoke, you had a particularly hard time sharing your encounter with me. Over the years, did it get any easier for you to think about seeing that Dogman?
Yes and no. When you tell the story, when you reach out and you share your experience, it kind of brings it all home. You find out for certain, for absolute certain, that you're not crazy, that these things are out there, and you didn't imagine it. It's hard to bring yourself back to that place where your world kind of turned upside down. But in the end, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to face that experience and to share that experience. I can say with all certainty that even since our first conversation, I feel more comfortable talking about it. I definitely don't think I'm crazy anymore.
Oh, you're definitely not crazy. It's good that you realize now that every time you talk about that experience, as difficult as that might be, you're going to grow from it. Would you say that there's one main reason why that encounter has given you so much trouble over the years, or do you think it's a combination of things?
I do think it's a combination of things. The point I've hit on a few times, that your world kind of turns upside down. That fantasy and reality are a little closer to each other than you thought they were. The fear of the unknown, what else is out there, is definitely a part of it.
It sure is. And when you see something like that, Yeah, it just makes it that much more difficult, unfortunately. How much of a difference do you think it would have made in your ability to deal with your encounter if your parents had believed you when you told them what you had seen?
I'm sure that having that support, if they had 100% believed me, it would have made it a lot easier to come to terms with what had happened. You feel when your loved ones, especially your parents, that they don't believe you or you think you must have been mistaken. It's a hard reality, and it makes you question yourself when you shouldn't.
Talking about your parents, you said you kept looking over your shoulder at the door when you were telling them about your experience that night. Have you been obsessed with looking over your shoulder ever since you had that experience?
I wouldn't say I've been obsessed with it, but I can say for the last 15 years I've been much more aware of my surroundings. I don't like not knowing what's going on around me. Really, since that day, I've kept my head on a swivel, and I do realize that it's because I think there is a part of me that is half expecting to see that thing standing there leering at me again.
Well, nothing in life is certain, as you know, but I'm pretty sure you're never going to see another Dogman again.
I hope not.
I hope not, too. Did you ever share the details of your encounter with anyone who surprised you with the way they responded?
Yes, there was one gentleman that I shared my encounter with, and I did it because I was trying to get a little bit more information out of him. A little bit of backstory to that is the wildlife rehab center that I worked at was also a meeting place for some of the members of the local Mono tribe. And again, more backstory, I actually knew this gentleman's name before I actually met him. There was a coyote, a permanent resident of this facility, who I had kind of bonded with. And days when I worked, I'd get there and I'd talk to him. I'd walk into the compound and walk up to his cage and talk to him. His name was Caillou. And I'd walk up and I'd do my morning greeting, and he would do the laughing dog thing where he'd kind of mouth open, happy dog, head shake, wagging his tail, and I'd scratch him through the cage and we'd talk, and I'd talk to him. He didn't actually talk back to me. But the Caillou had been caught in a poacher's trap, and in an effort to get out of the trap, he chewed his own leg off. And it was actually a Native American gentleman who found Caillou hopping down the road with 3 legs. And this gentleman got out of his car with a short piece of yellow nylon rope and managed to lasso this coyote, threw it in his car, and took it to the vet. And he's sitting in the vet's office with this wild coyote in his lap. Well, my nickname for Caillou was Laughing Coyote because he looked like he was laughing every morning when I'd come pet him. And one day, the people who kind of managed the facility asked me, "Why do you call him Laughing Coyote?" I said, "Because look at his face. He looks like he's laughing." And they surprised me with the information that the name of the gentleman who found Caillou originally was named Laughing Coyote. And it was that reason I approached him about my encounter, and I wanted to talk to him about it so I could see if there were any Mono legends about shapeshifters or anything like that. And I managed to corner him one day at the wildlife rehab center and sat down at some of the benches there with him and told him what I'd seen. And he sat there relatively impassively. And if you know anything about Native American legends, the coyote is the trickster. I had been told before I actually got to sit down and meet him that there's a reason why his name is Laughing Coyote. And to just be cautious with him because he is a trickster. He takes his name very seriously. Well, after relaying everything that had happened, he just looks at me and asks, "Well, was it mean? Was it aggressive? Did it chase you?" And I replied, "No, it just looked relatively curious. Maybe because I wasn't absolutely terrified out of my mind at the time." And he just waved it off. Don't worry about it. And the more I pressed him, the more he would just dismiss it. And I never truly got an answer from him about what he thought I saw, about any of the legends or anything like that. He did, in fact, live up to his namesake.
Well, that sure was a creepy way for him to respond.
Yeah, it definitely put me off for quite a while.
Well, I think that would have put almost anyone off. You describe yourself as already having been broken at the time of your encounter. Why do you say that?
The reason why I say that is a few months prior to this whole incident, in July of 2003, I was working for a local farmer who sold fruit at farmers markets, one in San Francisco and one in Santa Monica. And one day at the Santa Monica farmers market, there was a car accident. An older gentleman drove through the market and killed several people on scene. He actually drove right past the booth I was working in. And I was one of the first people to try and render aid to some of the people who had been injured, including a 18-month-old girl who was in her stroller. It was an older gentleman who had been struck by the car right in front of our booth, and I found out later that he passed away in the hospital not long after. And I had been treated for PTSD after that incident. I didn't sleep for about a week. I lost about 20 or 30 pounds afterwards because I just didn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing the incident replay itself. And that's why I felt like I was already broken when that happened. I think that's why I didn't panic, why I didn't freak out when I saw this thing.
So you really were having a rough go of it even before you saw that Dogman?
Yes, I was being treated, like I said, for PTSD and depression. And I think a part of my brain that was responsible for dealing with traumatic or disturbing events was just still overloaded at that point.
I'll bet it was. Do you think your knowledge of and experience with animals helped you deal with your encounter or made it more difficult?
In the long run, I think it made it harder. Having a background in animal physiology and what the local fauna was comprised of, I knew there was nothing in the area that thing could be. In high school, when we were dissecting and rearticulating these animals, you understand how the mechanism of motion works in an animal. You understand how they move, how they're supposed to move. And seeing a bipedal hominid with a dog's head, you know it's wrong. Animals aren't shaped like that. Nothing is shaped like that.
Well, in most cases they aren't, but as you found out that night, sometimes they are. It is so hard to wrap your head around, though. Have you ever second-guessed whether you should listen to episodes of the show, wondering if totally avoiding the topic of dogmen might have helped you recover more easily?
I did for a little while. I think the first episode I ever listened to, I stopped for quite a while. It was just a little too close to home, and, I couldn't even tell you what episode that was. But it set in stone for me that other people have seen these things. And I still had so many questions that I wanted answered. I just kept coming back and listening to more and researching as much as I could. I must have filled out a contact form a dozen times over the years and deleted it, but I had to know. And I'm glad I finally worked up the courage to finally do that.
You'll never know how glad I am that you decided to hit send instead of delete this time. You told me in the pre-interview that your dad would have driven down that road past that Dogman that night before you did if he hadn't had the night off of work. Do you think he would have had an easier or harder time dealing with seeing that Dogman than you did?
I think my father probably would have had a harder time in the long run. He was an older man and kind of set in his ways, and things were black or white to him. It was real or not real. And I think my big fear when I thought about it later would have been that he would have panicked and hit a tree, or worse yet, tried to get a better look at this thing. I think in the long run, he would have had a much harder time than I did.
Well, you know him better than anyone else, so when you say that, I take you for your word. Now that you did hit the send button instead of the delete button, do you think you made the right choice?
Absolutely. It's been an immeasurable relief to me to, share this experience I had with people that understand it. You especially, Vic. Again, I can't thank you enough for listening to me and for doing what you do for everybody who's had these encounters.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm just so glad to be able to help in any way. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yeah. If you're listening to this and you're questioning whether or not you should talk about it, or share your experience, don't question. Just do it. It will help you in the long run in ways you don't understand yet. I always wondered if my wife truly believed me when I told her about what I saw. And just having confronted this and shared my experience has kind of given me the courage to truly confront her about what she thought. And the relief in knowing that she really did always believe me, 100%. That by itself was more of a load off than you can imagine. So again, if you're hearing this, if you're questioning at all whether you should, just do it. It will only benefit you.
Well, like I told you before in the first conversation, I am so glad to hear that reaching out did help you as much as it has. That's why I do this. That's really good news. But having said that, thanks again so much for your time. Thanks again so much for coming on and sharing that experience with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on, Vic.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks again so much. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.